Hello, I'm Christina Mullis, your classmate from Cincinnati, Ohio. Today I'm going to talk about Treasury Inflation Protective Securities. Treasury Inflation Protective Securities, known by the acronym TIPS, has caught the eye of certain investors recently who are wary of rising inflation. They are known as a sort of inflation insurance or protection against inflation. But are TIPS better than conventional bonds? First, what are TIPS? They are debt securities designed to increase in value as consumer prices rise. They are issued in 5-year, 10-year, and 30-year maturities. They were introduced in 1997 and were largely ignored until recently when inflation increased in 2021. Inflation went from 1.4% in January of 2021 to 7% in December 2021. Assets in the TIPS funds have nearly doubled since 2018, with a balance of $218 billion, as reported by the Wall Street Journal on February 7th, 2022. In 2021, they outperformed other bonds with a 5.5% average compared to a minus 1.7% for the US Bond Index Fund. Are you intrigued? Rising inflation isn't lost on any of us. And having securities that capitalize on inflation seems like a win-win, right? Well, here's how they work. As we learned this week, most bonds pay investors a set amount annually or semi-annually, and then they pay the face value at maturity. The Treasury Inflation Protection Securities increases, as I mentioned, when the consumer price index for urban consumers rises. TIPS pay a set interest rate, but the payments vary because they are based on the fluctuating face value of the securities. They pay at least their original value at maturity. But here's the kicker. Unless the TIPS are held in a tax-free retirement account, the holder must pay federal taxes on any increases in the face value, even though they won't collect the face value until they sell the security or they allow it to mature. So again, you're paying those federal income taxes up front, but you are not having to pay state or local taxes. So there's a little bit of a benefit there. So what happens in a deflation environment? The opposite of inflation. So in this case, the TIPS securities, the principal will be adjusted downward, and your interest payments are less than they would be if inflation occurred or if the consumer price index remained the same. You have the safeguard. At maturity, if the adjusted principal is less than the security's original principal, you are paid the original principal value. So let's say you're interested in purchasing TIPS. Well, those who are interested can do so directly through treasurydirect.com, but the investors should know that tracking the market value of this security, of just like a TIPS that you would purchase, is much harder than if the TIPS were part of a mutual fund, which is an option that you could do. You could purchase TIPS securities in a mutual fund that could even be in a retirement account. But if you want to purchase TIPS directly, like I said, treasurydirect.com. You cannot sell them directly, however, through treasurydirect.com. So there are some hoops that you have to go through to be able to sell these. It's important for the potential investor to know that while inflation is a hot topic right now, and that the TIPS have performed very well over the past year, they're extremely volatile. Even a government mention of tackling inflation can send the securities in a downward spiral. Bond strategists seem to be in agreement that TIPS are currently overpriced, and they believe the break-even rates in TIPS prices to decline as inflation begins to stabilize. They warn investors into jumping into the craze at this point. Jeff Johnson, who's head of fixed income product management at Vanguard Group, which runs the two largest TIPS mutual funds, has a warning for wannabe investors. He says that at this point in time, if you want to jump in and jump on the bandwagon, he says that it's, quote, akin to buying flood insurance after the flood.